Thanks very much. Sounds like there was some really good conversation happening out there over morning tea. We want that to continue in here. So this session is around delivering clean energy hubs, and we've heard both Paul Simshauser and Merrin talk about this, and this is a bit of something that's very exciting for us as we work through this process, what this potentially could look like. We've only just started off a feasibility study into this, and we've got Kehl here, who's the Executive General Manager for Strategy and Business Development, who also has the privilege of running the Clean Energy Hub feasibility study for Powerlink in conjunction with the Queensland Government and Jews. So without further ado, I just might hand over to Kev to run us through the presentation before we get started our table discussions. Thanks, Kev.
Thanks, Jared. So I'll just introduce the Clean Energy Hub, and on the way through we'll pose a number of questions, and I'd like you to think about that because we'd really appreciate your contribution, your input, and particularly the experience you had or experiences you may have had in other jurisdictions as to how we can make sure we pull this together in an appropriate way that makes best use of the capital and the resources that we have available to us. So the Clean Energy Hub largely is a result of the great work that was discussed at the TAPA last year. I think there was a session on the renewable energy zones and what that might mean, and particularly we picked up from that in the feedback from yourselves. So for us, this is about supporting generation and renewable infrastructure development in a way that takes advantage of the scale efficiencies. I think both Merrin and Paul might have mentioned it's not necessarily easy to get generators to come together or renewable proponents to come together and present us with an option like we have with large customers. There's certainly advantages for them in that. But in terms of the competitive nature, we know we need a different approach for bringing together scale efficient investments particularly for the connection of renewables. And that's the idea of the renewable energy zone. They do work better with a diverse range of generation. Particularly, you don't want all your peak coincident at the same time, otherwise you overbuild network or you constrain generators off, and we've all had a bit of a conversation about that this morning. In terms of the renewable energy zones, we've got a couple of models. We've talked a bit about the Aldoga site. EDQ are running that one near Larkham Creek in central Queensland. The one I'll talk about a bit more today is about the Clean Energy Hub that came out of the Powering North Queensland plan announced by the state government in June. I think also recognising that in terms of the bringing together of this information, Powerlink's somewhat limited in what we can share about from one proponent about another. Hence the Clean Energy Hub, as we go through it, the feasibility study, there will be some confidentiality requirements from our perspective in terms of not sharing a whole lot of information that is would be held to be commercial by particular proponents. In terms about the model here, the two sort of renewable energy zone options, Aldoga, for example, is probably a Res 2 option, a hub and spoke model with a lot of connections in a geographical area or constrained area. In terms about the Clean Energy Hub in northern northwestern Queensland, it's probably more a combination of the two. That is a high capacity transmission line, potentially, with a number of dedicated connection hubs along the way, very much depending upon the proponents that might be interested in connecting. Okay, I'm sure you've all studied the Queensland Energy Plan, and particularly the North Queensland Energy Plan, and the announcement from the Queensland Government. So as we said, the Powering Queensland plan included a commitment by the government of $150 million to invest in strategic transmission infrastructure in north and northwestern Queensland, subject to the feasibility study. And that feasibility study we're now kicking off and progressing. And this discussion today is an early part of that, particularly, as I said, in seeking to gain some feedback from yourselves. The Energy Hub itself potentially is looking for 2,000 megawatts of renewable energy, and I know earlier we had that conversation about the potential constraint in central Queensland, and I'll talk a little bit about the economic modelling that we see as part of this feasibility study to address and compensate for that as best we can. In terms of why here, I just refer you a bit of background, go back to figures 7.1 and 7.2 of the TAPA, and what you'll see from that is there is a strong coincidence of wind on the western side of the Great Divide there, between round about Forsyth and Hughenden, and also the solar. So that opportunity for diversity of generation in a geographical area and ability to potentially drive or run a transmission corridor through that. And also taking account of the existing proponents that are already highlighted on the diagram and are known in terms of their potential developments. We'd like to explore particularly your views about the Clean Energy Hub as we go through that discussion today. In terms of what it is we're doing here, I think the Clean Energy Hub that we're looking to develop and the framework we'd like to see as a template. This is not the only one, and indeed other transmission companies around Australia have started to work through a similar process. We'd like to, as we go through this opportunity in northern northwestern Queensland, to develop a template that we can potentially use in other areas as a framework to determining what options there are for clean energy hubs or some strategic transmission infrastructure to promote and also allow for economic connection of renewable energy sources. So our feasibility study we're expecting will include technical feasibility, that's the configuration, the network stability, security and reliability aspects, what does that mean? Environmental feasibility, what's the particular route, are there any constraints, any areas of particular concerns? And economic feasibility, to start with, that's potentially about the project economics and the viability, depending on the proponents and their location. But the other one is that we've talked about is that market participants and impacts. And so what's going to be the market impact? And we see quite a bit of work there, particularly modelling some scenarios around how the generators might connect and the bidding patterns. And also one of the other ones is the commercial arrangements and model, and be interested to hear that we can't necessarily provide firm access from a transmission connection proponent or transmission connection arrangement. We're interested in feedback from yourselves as we go through discussion about commercial models you might have seen elsewhere. If you've given some thought to this, what those commercial models might look like. The first step in our process is to call for an expression of interest to determine the potential generation, storage and load customers in the region who should be included in the assessment. You might say this is about connecting renewable generation, but as we've heard, we need to take the whole of network and the whole of state operation and the whole of NEM operation into account here. And we've heard a little bit, as I said before, about those potential constraints. So to the extent that we've got load and storage to offset, it then allows us to offset some increased generation capacity in the north without necessarily driving investment to overcome any constraints in the transmission network. So particularly important for us is to make sure we get the whole suite of interested proponents coming forward. And that also allows us to integrate with the market in that sort of market modelling. Just running through my notes, sorry. So I'll just go back to that one. The key points there, as we said, that we'd like to talk to you about, so to take early notice of the questions, so it can be running through your mind. So the factors that we should be considering for the configuration and the route through that particular area. The integration and impact on the broader transmission network and customers. As I said, that's where we want to get the broader range of potential proponents, and particularly the North Queensland options for customers or opportunities for customers on the northern side of any potential constraint. In terms of the associated customers, I think I've talked pretty much about those. As I said, it's sort of north of Rockhampton because that's where we see that constraint particularly binding earlier on. And the questions I have here, are there any market participants that we should be considering, aggregators or anybody else? And how can we go about attracting particularly those diverse proponents? So lots of solar, no shortage of those, but I think wind is the other great advantage we have with this particular location. So how do we go about it? Is there anything different we need to do to encourage some more wind proponents potentially to come to the fore, as well as I said, those new or additional customers? In terms of the of the economic assessment and evaluation, broadly the hub itself is predicated on sustainability of the connected generators and storage and or customers. And that's going to require from us some significant market and economic modelling and testing. And that's going to require a range of scenarios. And with the previous discussion, I know Merrin responded to a question about how do we make sure that we don't have a obligation, so to speak, about making firm access to everybody, and so it depends on a system dispatch by the market operator. But what we need to do to consider for the Clean Energy Hub, we think, is to make sure that we've assessed a broad range of scenarios to determine under any particular circumstances, or under the broad range of circumstances, that the Clean Energy Hub will add value to the market and reduce costs for customers in the longer term. So to that end, we'll be doing quite a bit of market and economic work through this process. And certainly we look to this to give us some plausible scenarios potentially for generation options. The other part of this that's important to us is, as I said, those commercial arrangements. Are there particular experiences that you've had or that you can see in other areas that we should take into account and potentially consider as part of the feasibility study in terms of the commercial arrangements with the proponents and even potentially between proponents? That would be appreciated. Stakeholders' engagement, a key point or key part, and you are the first. This discussion we're having hasn't necessarily been had with anybody else, so this is the first stage in our stakeholder engagement here. We do have a plan to engage with councils, the communities, landholders, government and others, market participants, and particularly those affected by the environmental and the route selection ultimately, and also an assessment of impact on stakeholders. So this is a key part for us in terms of this is an investment for the people of Queensland. How are we making sure that we talk to all the right people at all the right time and they get all the right information or all the information that they need to be informed and engaged and to contribute and participate in the process? So we'll be having some local and targeted involvement. And also some more, I suppose, broad level engagement approaches, including meetings, webinars, using the internet, portals, and all those sorts of methodologies. So we're trying to get as many proponents as we can. I expect in terms of the expression of interest, we'll be going to the national papers, but if there's any other ways that we can make sure we engage the right people, please, we'd appreciate your input. So the questions we've got relate to, for the discussion today, particularly who else should we talk to, and from your experience, how would you like to be kept engaged as we move along? So I think I've pretty much run through that this Clean Energy Hub option is the culmination of work that we've been discussing about for quite a while, or the progression of work we've been discussing for quite a while in terms of the renewable energy zone. We are out to test a range of concepts and options in a way that is as transparent as it can be, but also results in very, very plausible and credible scenarios with the opportunity to replicate in other areas. This isn't the one and only. And so for your input, we'd appreciate any views on modelling or replication of this model. And then the next question is, are there any other regions that you see as valuable where we should be looking to potentially for a clean energy hub or something along these lines, a renewable energy zone? So in terms of the Clean Energy Hub, just to give you a bit of a broad outline where we're heading for this, obviously the speed at which this goes depends on the proponents. And remember, the feasibility study is the first stage before we move into evaluating a broader connection. We are doing this on behalf of the Queensland Government, as Paul outlined. So this month we're expecting to have the expressions of interest out to interested proponents. Once again, very, very welcome to take feedback to who we should be including and anybody who you think we're not on the normal radar for us. Then in September we're looking to commence that technical and economic assessment when we know who the broad range of proponents are as a result of the EOI. And then heading through by the end of October, we'd like to have developed a draft route through the particular zone once we know who the key proponents are, so that we can move then and do the broader evaluation, economic and market evaluation. And this process will all be underpinned by ongoing consultation and engagement with developers, proponents and stakeholders. Okay, no, keep going. So before I leave, we'd appreciate your thoughts, as I said, on the factors we need to consider for the configuration route, what other market participants should be considered and how we attract them, the commercial arrangements that could be used to enhance the hub and particularly to support diversity of generation, load and storage. Who else should we speak to as part of the feasibility study? Is there anybody we've sort of missed in that broader description of stakeholders? And also with a view to how can this model be replicated in other areas. It's a fair task. We've invited you for morning tea and lunch, so this is payback. But that's been a fair bit of information. So I'm happy to, if it's okay with Jared, I'm happy to answer any questions before we kick off.
Yeah, I'm wondering, you've made no mention of North Queensland's undeveloped hydro and pump storage. Like I know from previous work, there's at least 3,000 megawatts of really good sites. And I know that the government is part of this project. They're undertaking a review. So you probably need to think about how you're going to integrate their review with what you're doing.
Yep.
Pump storage is going to be, and hydro is going to be very important.
Yeah, no, thanks, Simon, absolutely. So it's a couple of, I suppose, avenues for that. One is just we're going broadly with the EOI. We're not presupposing anything. And the other one, we are not integrated, but we're working in close coordination with the government's processes, with the auction and the storage that Paul talked about this morning. So we're coordinating with them on that. But at the same time, we are casting the net broadly here. And I'll point out that the load and storage are not limited, as I said, to the clean energy hub only. Load and storage is potentially anywhere north of Rockhampton, pretty much, to make sure that we take account of this in terms of the modelling and the economic assessment. No other questions, guys? You're all right to go? Sorry.
Just one question. If companies have commercial information that they'd like to share with Kehl, what would the process be? NDAs or?
Yeah, so we're quite happy to do an NDA, probably a standard form. We don't want to, because I appreciate that. Also, we're making a commitment to the confidentiality of the information that's provided to us, and we'll be also using some consultants to do some work for us. So that can then be limited to them as well. We understand that Powerlink has a broader interest here in terms of the clean energy hub and the work that we're doing here, but we also don't want to have information that we wouldn't normally otherwise have in a normal process. So NDAs and/or use of the consultants to help us out and keep that information, I suppose, locked away if that makes proponents any happier. Yeah. Sensitivity is absolutely top of mind, and particularly, as I said, that's why we feel and government that we need to do this as a pre-feasibility study, because otherwise I don't think the proponents would all necessarily come to us with a package deal. Thanks, mate.
Good job, Kev.
Thank you.
So I think as Kev sort of said, you guys have got a really good opportunity. This is probably the first group of people that we've really talked about. This is really just hot off the presses, which is why it's a bit of a blank canvas in many terms. You can see from Kev's presentation, we sort of know what the high-level boundaries are and the scope is, but outside of that, we're really open to your thoughts and views here today. And so we really encourage you guys to push us, to challenge us, to put some information out there that will help us in terms of coming up with the best potential outcome for this feasibility study. So before we break into the table, I just want to make sure from a logistical perspective that we've got... Can I just get the Powerlink table hosts to put up their hand just so I know that we've got one at each table? Because we might just have to collapse. We've got Maury's putting his hand up. Oh, love you, Maury. Love you, Maury. So we've got Damien, we've got 1, 2, we've got Mahesh, we've got Chris, we've got Alistair, and we've got Susan. And Susan can jump over to Maury and Melissa can sit on that one. Okay, so we have a table, a Powerlink representative at each table. Their job is not to talk. Their job is to listen to you guys and to take down what you say. If you believe that your powling person is dominating the discussion, you have my permission to slap them around the head a bit and say, hang on, you're here to listen from what I have to say. We've got about an hour, so we've got 5 questions to get through, so we sort of have to hit the ground running. You might want to spend more time on some questions than others because some of them are a bit meatier and chunkier, but we probably want to sort of wrap up discussions and have a bit of a quick debrief around that 11:45 mark. Just want to make sure that, have you guys got your butcher's paper down the back there? So I've got butcher's paper up here. We really want your thoughts and views. Kev will be available to walk around and float. So if you have any sort of real sort of specific or technical questions that you believe that Kev might be able to assist with, then please put your hand up and we can let you know. But this is it. This is the main part of the day. This is what this forum is held for, is for the next real hour and a bit to hear from you guys about what your thoughts are and where the potential opportunities and challenges lie with the Clean Energy Hub, particularly in North Queensland, but also how it could be replicated across other parts of the state. Okay, let's hear some robust discussion, guys. Off you go.